Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that Eva is stunned when Izaiah openly flirts with Kat, a scene charged less by novelty than by the tectonic plates of history and resentment that ripple beneath it. The shock is immediate, not because anyone in this town expects monogamy of loyalties, but because the flirtation detonates a dozen assumptions Eva has stacked like fragile glass around herself. That single image, Izaiah leaning in across a table, laughing with the woman who is at once intimately familiar and achingly foreign, becomes a mirror in which everything Eva has kept under wraps flashes back at her, distorted and unforgiving. The story needs to be recentered for that moment to land. Izaiah's arrival in Uptown 6 weeks earlier had been an event more felt than announced. He slipped in with the kind of casual gravity people notice after they've already felt the absence of it. A new set of shoes on an old floorboard. Eva met him the second day he was in town, at the coffee shop by the theater, when Uptown still smelled like winter and fresh paint. He introduced himself with a smile that carried history but not apology, the way some people wear danger like a vintage coat. They talked in short bursts that felt like an agreement, a promise to meet again, a handshake made of eyes rather than hands. That promise was small. In this town, small promises were often the most binding. Jacob met Izaiah separately that first week. The encounter happened at a late-night diner where the regulars needed less light than gossip. Jacob and Izaiah sat across from each other, neither trying too hard to explain their pasts. Jacob, who is at once wary and disarmingly honest, found himself engaging easily with Izaiah. In the clatter of cups and the hum of fluorescent bulbs, their conversation wove into the group. Derek, Ashley, Naomi, who treated Izaiah like another variable to be measured, tested, maybe exploited. He saw in Izaiah someone who might be useful, someone who might pull threads no one else could reach. The group's chatter framed Izaiah as an opportunity, but also as a potential hazard, the kind of man with an easy smile who might ask for something in return, which made Eva's later discovery all the sharper. She found Kat and Izaiah together in a place that should have been neutral, the community hall, during the fundraiser for Thomas, who had been injured on a construction site the week prior. Thomas's accident was raw in the town's memory, metal and fear, a hospital corridor that smelled like bleach and regret. People were supposed to be gathered to rally, to exchange stories of support. Instead, Eva walked in to see Kat and Izaiah sitting at the same table, heads close, eyes animated. They looked as if they had histories written in common spaces, not in the broken, frayed margins that Eva had assumed separated them. Eva's reaction was immediate and hot, betrayal paired with righteous fury. For her, the sight of Kat laughing with Izaiah came with two accusations in one breath: that Kat was flirting with the man Eva had considered a small, private promise, and that Kat had abandoned Thomas in his hour of need, choosing amusement over compassion. The fury was complicated. It was not simply jealousy. It was a conviction that loyalty had been bartered away for something as fragile as conversation. Eva didn't wait to listen. She ran to Kat, as much to accuse as to measure the wound she felt. Her voice carried the jagged edge of someone who had rehearsed the accusation 1,000 times in the dark. Kat, taken off guard, raised her hands more in self-defense than surrender. She was not indifferent to Thomas. She had been at the hospital the night he was admitted. Professional cadences. But she also had a different language of duty. Unlike Eva, whose love tended to be possessive and immediate, Kat's affections were shaped by layers of compromise toward a younger sister she had spent years protecting, toward a mother who taught her the necessity of choices. She could not explain herself in the time before Eva stormed off. The silence that followed Eva's leaving was heavier than any argument could have been. Izaiah watched the exchange with an expression that registered interest and something close to caution. He recognized, without being told, the chemistry between the sisters, the way one moved deliberately to shield, the other to expose. He was intrigued not simply because of the romance prospects but because the family dynamic presented a puzzle. When he learned later, in a private moment when he pressed for the particulars, that Eva and Kat were half-sisters, sharing a father but not a mother, his intrigue sharpened into a kind of anthropological curiosity. He asked why they were so different, not out of cruelty but as someone cataloging the unusual, same blood, diverging histories. Kat's answer, when she finally gave it, was spare and defensive. "Leslie," she said, was Eva's mother. Nicole was hers. The names landed hard, signifiers of different houses and different economies of care. Leslie had been the kind of mother who smoothed jagged feelings into polite phrases. Nicole's influence was rawer, improvisational, more inclined to risk. The sisters' separation had been more than domestic. It was an inheritance of temperament. Izaiah listened and tried to map these contours into his own understanding. He could see how loneliness had carved different caves in their hearts. He understood that siblings could be parallel rivers, sourced in the same mountain but flowing into different seas. He went too far in his curiosity. The observation that they were so different, repeated in the wrong tone, cracked something in Kat. It wasn't just that he pointed out her wounds. It was that the remark felt like a measurement, a way of reducing her to a fascinating specimen. Kat, who had built a thick skin around vulnerability, interpreted his curiosity as an affront. She snapped, harsher than anyone expected, and walked away. Her anger was not only at being assessed but at being objectified in a town where identities could be bought, sold, and traded like contraband. That same afternoon, while Kat's anger simmered and Eva lingered in wounded silence, Izaiah received a summons from his father, Elon. The summons came without preamble, carried by a man who delivered messages the way a weather vane delivered winds, without loyalty, only direction. Elon's name in itself carried implication. He is a figure whose presence in any room rearranges conversations. His influence over local industry and the less visible levers of power in this region means that his interests are never purely personal. He calls, people move. The mere suggestion that Elon might want something from his son injected a new strain of tension into an already taut wire. Speculation spread quickly. Izaiah's arrival had already been a small scandal. It exposed fault lines among Uptown's families and businesses. Rumors proliferated. Was Elon sending his son to spy, to secure an interest, to settle an old debt? People whispered that Izaiah could be the lever Elon used to move pieces on a larger board. The question hung: would Elon ask Izaiah to do something he refused to do? That possibility made the town uneasy because the answer would determine whether Izaiah was a threat or a pawn. The father-son dynamic mattered more than their private conversation. It suggested that Isaiah's flirtations and casual charm were embedded in a strategy. Meanwhile, Joey entered the scene with a different kind of appetite. He was a negotiator by temperament and a man who recognized when a struggle could be monetized. Joey had begun making moves not aggressively, but with the long detached patience of someone who photographs opportunities and returns later to develop them. He had engaged in a conversation with Elon that read like an old, familiar calculus, bargaining over influence, over alliances, perhaps even over human capital, with Jacob's name threaded through it like a common seam. Joey's interest in Jacob wasn't personal, it was tactical. Jacob represented a nexus, a man with a reputation, a family, and the kind of local loyalty that could be harnessed or broken depending on the goal. Elon, in turn, knew Jacob and knew Jacob's son, the generational line that often makes or breaks local deals. He understood the leverage family ties could provide, and the risks they posed. If Joey intended to bring Jacob into some plan, Elon had every reason to know the boundaries Jacob could cross and the ones he could not. If Elon wanted to block Joey or shape the negotiations, he could do so with the kind of inside knowledge that made him dangerous. The town itself became an apparatus for negotiation, a web of favors, debts, and withheld truths that made each public conversation a private battlefield. Back at the fundraiser, the mood remained brittle. Thomas's injury was a specter. People were trying to stitch together a sense of normalcy with too few stitches. Eva moved through the crowd with the tight-lipped resolve of someone trying to forget that she had been shown up, not just in love but in loyalty. Her eyes kept flicking to the table where Kat had sat with Izaiah. Each time she saw them, she felt betrayed anew. Those reactions were not solely about Izaiah. They were a shorthand for all the ways she felt left behind. Eva's worldview had always been one that required constancy. If you loved someone, allegiance was visible and measurable. Kat's perceived abandonment of Thomas, whether real or imagined, punctured that worldview. Kat, on the other hand, navigated the room like someone carrying several lives at once. She had her own obligations, small kindnesses, unpaid favors, the quiet work of keeping certain people afloat. She had to negotiate with her conscience and her past. Her differences with Eva were not just personality, they were survival tactics. Where Eva wanted to resist change, Kat had learned to bend. This fundamental difference made conversations between them like tectonic plates moving slowly until one slipped and everything shifted. Izaiah's presence amplified these differences. He paid attention to the chasms between people the way other men pay attention to a new engine. He was interested in how loyalties could be tested and how power lived in the undercurrents of small towns. To him, the flirtation was a test, a way of seeing what moved the sisters. He noticed the ease with which Eva reached for accusation and the way Kat's defenses always masqueraded as indifference. But he misread a key element. Interpersonal conflict here was not just a result of romantic competition. It was a map of older failures, of promises broken before he ever arrived. When Eva left that night without hearing Kat's side, her departure acted like a trigger. It left conversations unresolved and questions spinning. People in Uptown are used to living with loose ends. They tell themselves that time will sort things, that silence can be a salve. But silence also corrodes. It leaves rumor to fester. It allows other actors, Joey, Elon, Jacob, to move with less scrutiny. Eva's retreat from the argument gave space for speculation. People began to fill the gaps with their own narratives. And those narratives were rarely kind. There is a darker element weaving through the town that afternoon, the subtle, near imperceptible calculus of debt and obligation. Thomas's injury had cost more than his body. It had upended local alliances and exposed who could be counted on. In small towns, injuries are social events as much as personal ones. They expose loyalties, reveal who shows up, and who calculates losses. The fundraiser became a theater where everyone rehearsed their roles. The presence of someone like Izaiah, new, unvetted, potentially useful, created an opportunity for old players to realign. Elon's summons to his son read like a curtain call. Joey's negotiation with Elon was another scene. Jacob's role in this is critical because he sits at the intersection of several storylines. He is not only a father but also a man with a reputation for pragmatism. He can be warm, but he is not sentimental about obligations that endanger his family. Jacob had been friendly with Izaiah, not a warm embrace, but a measured engagement, because he senses where usefulness begins and where danger resides. In a conversation with the group that included Derek, Ashley, and Naomi, Jacob had weighed Isaiah's potential. They debated whether the newcomer could be a tool for change or an accelerant for trouble. Jacob's instincts were both protective and strategic. He understood that any decision involving Izaiah would impact his son and the fragile safety net Jacob had built. Meanwhile, Joey's approach to Elon suggested stakes beyond a personal quarrel. Joey was negotiating in a language Elon understood: leverage, reciprocity, risk assessment. The mention of Jacob's son entered the conversation as a bargaining chip, a human variable that could be used to secure something larger. This is the kind of moral arithmetic that grinds in the background of the town's social life. People counted not just in dollars but in futures and reputations. If Elon moved to block Joey, it would not be because he preferred one man over another. It would be because allowing Joey's plan to proceed risked destabilizing the order Elon had spent years maintaining. All of this: flirtations, family tensions, summonses, negotiations, pulses beneath a surface that appears ordinary: coffee shops, fundraisers, hospital rooms. That contrast is part of what gives the narrative its charge. Uptown is a place that seems quaint until you examine how events ripple outward. A single flirtation becomes an axis on which larger conflicts turn. A call from a father like Elon is not a private matter. It is a signal that pieces will be moved. Eva's fury at the table is not only personal, it is a social earthquake whose aftershocks will reveal long-buried transactions. To understand the stakes, we must examine character motivations more closely. Eva's anger is as much performative as it is raw. She needs people to see the boundaries she sets, because boundaries are how she keeps herself from being consumed. Trust for her is currency. It has been spent and rationed over the years. When Izaiah flirts with Kat, Eva is not just jealous, she fears a dilution of the safe patterns she has relied on. Kat's reaction, in contrast, is pragmatic. She understands people are messy and chooses, where possible, to keep her options open. That pragmatic liberty can be misunderstood as betrayal. Izaiah, for his part, is a classic catalyst. His curiosity and charm unsettle the town, press buttons, and reveal fault lines he might not have intended to expose. The social physics of Uptown make every move consequential. An argument over loyalty becomes fodder for alliances. Joey and Dylan's bargaining over Jacob's son is not merely a subplot, it is a demonstration of how personal relationships are subsumed into larger structures of power. Jacob's choices, influenced by his conversations with Izaiah and by watching his sister and daughter at the fundraiser, will have ramifications that extend beyond a single family. In a town where reputations are fragile and fathers can call sons to account, decisions are never purely private. By the end of the evening, nothing is resolved. Eva's departure leaves questions unanswered. Kat's anger simmers like embers. She does not apologize, not because she is proud, but because she knows apologies often do not mend the deeper things between them. Izaiah heads to meet his father, carrying the impression that this town is more complex than his initial read. Joey plots. Elon watches. Jacob processes, calculating how his moves will affect his son and his standing in a community that will judge him for both bravery and cowardice. The town holds its breath without exhaling, aware that the next day will demand new alignments and that the simple act of speaking to the wrong person could set off consequences no one can easily contain. There is, in all of this, a sense that relationships are currencies that the town cannot afford to squander. The flirtation was not the point, it was the spark. What matters is what people will do next, whether they protect each other, whether they bargain, whether they use the moment to settle old scores. The stakes are human lives, reputations, and futures. Each character's next choice will reveal what they value most: family, power, self-preservation, or perhaps a chance at change that requires more than just a flirtation. The early arcs converge here, at the edge of decisions that will reshape Uptown's fragile order, and the story is only beginning to unfold. The night after the fundraiser, Uptown slept uneasily. The lights from the community hall dimmed into the kind of quiet that breeds speculation. Eva's outburst lingered in everyone's memory, not as a singular drama but as a fault line cracking open the delicate balance the town had kept for years. Whispers moved faster than wind, reshaping the story into versions no one could verify. By morning, every cafe, every barber shop, every classroom had its own telling of what had happened between Eva, Kat, and Izaiah. Most of them were wrong. All of them were dangerous. Eva woke before sunrise, her head full of the fragments she'd tried to outrun. Regret came late, but it came heavy. She replayed the moment she'd walked away from Kat without listening. Pride had won that argument, but it didn't quiet the guilt that followed. She knew Thomas didn't deserve to be weaponized in her anger. The injury that had nearly cost him his leg had already made him bitter, suspicious of the people who promised to help and never showed. Eva had sworn she'd stand by him, yet she'd allowed jealousy to steer her off course. She poured herself coffee that tasted like rust and decisions she couldn't undo. The town outside her window was grey and waiting, as if daring her to fix the mess she'd made. Kat wasn't sleeping either. She sat on her porch wrapped in a coat too thin for the cold, replaying Izaiah's words, her own anger, and the way Eva's eyes had burned when she'd accused her. She wasn't sorry for standing up for herself, but she hated that Eva would rather fight than talk. Her phone buzzed. Thomas's sister checking on her, asking if she'd be at the hospital later. Kat typed a response, erased it, typed again, then didn't send anything. She needed to breathe before she faced anyone connected to that night. She needed to think about Izaiah, about what he represented, not just another man passing through, but someone whose presence seemed to rearrange the energy around him. There was something calculated about him, something that made her wonder what game she'd accidentally stepped into. Izaiah, meanwhile, was not wondering. He was already on his way to meet Elon. His father's summons wasn't one you ignored, Not if you valued your future or your freedom. The meeting was set at Elon's private office, a sterile space that looked more like a museum than a place of business. The older man didn't rise when Izaiah entered. He simply gestured to the chair across from him. Between them sat a glass table, its surface reflecting the two faces, one seasoned and guarded, the other still learning what power costs. "I hear you've been keeping busy," Elon said, his tone neither kind nor cruel. "Making friends." "Stirring the water." "I didn't realize Uptown was so fragile," Izaiah replied, keeping his voice light. "Fragile things are easy to break," Elon said. "That's why I sent you here, to test how much pressure this place can take before it collapses." The sentence hung in the air. Izaiah frowned. "You sent me here?" Elon leaned forward. "You think I let my son move into a town like Uptown without reason?" "You were my message, Izaiah, a signal to the ones who owe me, to the ones who think I've softened, and to the Jacobs of this world, men who still believe integrity is currency." The mention of Jacob's name shifted something inside Izaiah. He'd liked the man, respected his steady nature. "Jacob has nothing to do with you," he said. Elon smiled thinly. "Everyone has something to do with me. Joey came to me yesterday. He thinks he can use Jacob to get leverage over my contracts. He's wrong, of course, but I let him think it." "And you," Elon pointed a ring finger toward him, "you're going to make sure neither he nor Jacob forgets who holds the cards." "I'm not your messenger," Izaiah said, his jaw tightening. "You're whatever I need you to be," Elon replied, "and don't pretend you don't enjoy the game. You inherited more of me than you like to admit." The conversation ended with silence thick enough to drown in. When Izaiah left, the cold air outside felt like release. Yet he knew there was no real escape from Elon's reach. Every move he made from here on would either defy his father or serve him. Both choices came with consequences. Back in town, Jacob met Joey at the old docks, a neutral place where men talked business without drawing attention. The water was low, the tide lazy, and the smell of salt carried years of secrets. Joey's tone was casual, but his eyes were too sharp. "I've been hearing things," Joey began. "About Elon's son?" "About you." Jacob folded his arms. "You're always hearing things. Doesn't make them true." Joey smirked. "Fair. But let's say, hypothetically, Elon's boy isn't here for the weather. Let's say he's here to stir up a little chaos. Wouldn't you want to make sure you're on the right side when it breaks?" Jacob studied him. Joey's offers were never just offers. They were traps baited with logic. "You're assuming there's going to be a break." Joey leaned closer. "There's always a break. People like Elon build pressure until something gives. And when it does, someone like me or you can step in and pick up the pieces. I'm giving you a chance to be ahead of the collapse instead of buried under it." Jacob didn't respond right away. He'd lived long enough to recognize manipulation dressed as opportunity. But he also knew that ignoring a man like Joey was more dangerous than accepting his offer. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Keep your eyes open," Joey said. "Let me know what Elon's planning. You've got access he doesn't suspect. And in return, I make sure when the dust settles, your son comes out clean." Jacob's expression didn't change, but inside, something twisted. The mention of his son was deliberate. Joey knew exactly where to push. "If you threaten my family." "Not a threat," Joey interrupted smoothly. "A guarantee. Help me, and your family stays safe. Don't, and Elon might find a use for them in his next experiment." The two men stared at each other until Joey turned and walked away, leaving Jacob alone with the slow-moving tide and an impossible choice. Elsewhere, Eva was trying to make amends. She found Kat outside the hospital later that day, a cigarette between her fingers and exhaustion written across her face. The first words were awkward, but necessary. "I shouldn't have yelled at you," Eva said. "I was angry. But not at you." "Not really." Kat didn't look at her. "You were angry because you thought I betrayed Thomas, or because you thought I stole someone from you?" Eva sighed. "Both, maybe." "Izaiah isn't. I don't even know what he is. I just didn't expect it to hurt that much." Kat finally turned toward her, her eyes sharp but tired. "You think I planned that? You think I sat down at that table to take something from you?" "No," Eva said softly. I think I was scared. You always seem stronger. I hate that I still care what you think of me. That disarmed Kat more than any apology could. She crushed her cigarette and exhaled. We're a mess. You know that? Different mothers, same bad luck. They both laughed, then not because anything was funny, but because it was the only way to break the tension. The truce didn't fix what was broken, but it built a bridge sturdy enough to cross when the time came. While the sisters tried to rebuild, Izaiah's conflict deepened. He met Jacob again, this time by chance at the diner where they'd first talked. Jacob's demeanor was different, more guarded, as if he'd seen the shadow of something he couldn't name. Elon's been busy, Jacob said quietly, stirring his coffee. You know what he wants from you? I know what he thinks he wants, Izaiah replied. That doesn't mean he'll get it. Jacob nodded. Be careful. Joey's playing both sides. He came to me, tried to turn me against your father. That sounds like Joey, Izaiah said, smirking faintly. He's got the soul of a salesman and the ethics of a snake. Don't underestimate him, Jacob warned. He's desperate. Desperate men don't bluff. Their conversation was interrupted by Naomi, who slid into the booth beside Jacob. You two look like you're planning a coup, she joked, but her eyes darted between them with curiosity. Naomi was loyal to no one but the truth, and sometimes that made her the most dangerous person in the room. If something's brewing, I want to know. People are nervous. Derek says Elon's been calling in debts. Ashley swears she saw Joey with one of his men near the mill last night. Jacob looked at Izaiah. Looks like your father's already moving. Izaiah leaned back, considering his next move. Then maybe it's time someone pushed back. Kat's name came up again later that night, this time in a conversation she didn't hear. Elon's associates had begun monitoring everyone connected to Izaiah. Her name was on a list along with Eva's and Jacob's. Elon didn't trust attachments. They made people unpredictable. He wanted control, and Izaiah's new connections were loose threads he couldn't afford. In his office, Elon told his advisor, if he won't do what he's told, we'll remind him what's at stake. Start with the girl, the one with the attitude. Kat's fate shifted in that moment, without her even knowing it. A surveillance car appeared outside her apartment 2 days later, disguised as a delivery van. Inside sat 2 of Elon's men, watching her every move. But Uptown had a strange way of pushing back. Naomi, ever suspicious, noticed the same van on her way to work 3 mornings in a row. She told Jacob, who told Izaiah. And that was when the real tension began, not just personal or emotional, but survival-based. Izaiah realized Elon's reach was deeper than he'd imagined, and that the only way to stop his father was to act faster than the old man could predict. He went to Kat's apartment at midnight. She opened the door, half asleep, irritated until she saw the urgency in his face. You're being watched, he said. Her confusion shifted to alarm. By who? My father's people. He thinks you're leverage. Leverage for what? For me, Izaiah said quietly. For control. Kat's eyes darkened. Then you need to leave. Now. I can't. If I run, he wins. But I can protect you if you trust me. She hesitated. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, but something in his tone made her believe him, just for a moment. Then tell me what to do. Act normal, he said. And don't let Eva know yet. She'll go straight at them, and they'll use that. Meanwhile, Joey's plans were unraveling faster than he could repair them. Elon had started cutting off his access to certain contracts, tightening financial screws. In desperation, Joey reached out to Naomi, hoping her reputation for integrity might lend credibility to his accusations. He told her Elon was manipulating the town, using his son as bait to root out dissent. Naomi listened, skeptical but intrigued. She began piecing together her own investigation, connecting names, dates, and small inconsistencies no one else had noticed. By the week's end, lines were being drawn. Jacob had to choose between protecting his son and confronting Joey. Eva and Kat had to decide whether to rebuild their fragile sisterhood or let history repeat itself. Izaiah had to face the truth, that defeating his father meant becoming the very thing he'd spent his life resisting. Elon, distant and calculating, prepared for the backlash he knew was coming. The town itself seemed to hold its breath again. Rumors spread of a meeting at the mill, A showdown between Joey's men and Elon's. Izaiah knew he couldn't stop it, not entirely, but he could redirect it. He reached out to Jacob, asking for help, and Jacob, weary but loyal, agreed. They planned to confront Elon's enforcers before the first move was made. Eva learned about it accidentally, overhearing Jacob's hushed call, and against Izaiah's warning, she told Kat. The sisters arrived at the mill just as the first truck pulled in. The air was thick with smoke and tension. Men with flashlights moved through the dark, voices sharp with suspicion. Izaiah stepped into the open, hands raised. "You want me?" he shouted. "You leave them out of this." A shadow emerged, one of Elon's men, holding a weapon. "Not for show." "Orders are orders," he said. "You don't get to pick who pays the price." Jacob, watching from the side, moved before anyone else could. What happened next would change Uptown forever, but in that suspended moment before chaos, everyone understood what was at stake. Family, loyalty, survival, all the quiet promises and unspoken debts that had led them here converged into a single breathless instant, the kind of moment that divides stories into before and after.